The Aborigines of Britain or any other country of corresponding climate, after discovering some natural cave, or making for themselves a rude hut, would probably take their next step in constructive art by attempting to form such utensils as might contain, and enable them to preserve, the fruits and seeds necessary for food. Assuming that they were then unprovided with even the rudest tools, for we refer to a time before our far-off ancestors knew the use of bronze or iron, they would form these utensils by twisting together the long, pliant osiers with which the land abounded, and of which, by the unaided action of the fingers, they could form baskets excellently adapted for the required purpose. The earliest authentic records of Britain refer to its inhabitants as expert basket makers. Their houses were made of willows and reeds, their fences and fortifications were living trees, with intertwisted branches, their boats were baskets, covered with skins, their domestic furniture, defensive armor, even the images employed in their religion, were each of wicker-work. Caesar, writing of the Druids, states that they have images of enormous size, the limbs of which, formed of wicker-work, they fill with living men, which being set on fire, the men perish enveloped in flames, and Strabo says, having prepared a Colossus of hay and thrown wood upon it, they burn together oxen, all sorts of wild beasts, and men. It has been assumed that these wicker-work images were in the human form, but there is nothing in either text to warrant this conclusion. The word Colossus implies a figure of large size, which may quite as probably have been that of some enormous animal. On the Shandwick stone, one of the most interesting of the Scottish series, figures of men, horses, stags, birds, and other animals are carved with much spirit, and with more than usual attention to their relative proportions. The animals are represented in lifelike attitudes, as if moving about. But there is one remarkable exception, a colossal four-legged creature, of a form peculiar to these Scottish stones, differs from the others as much in figure as in size. Compared with two sheep and a dog which occur on the same panel, its height, if erect, would be about 13 feet, its length about 18 feet, while its ungainly leaning posture is singularly suggestive of its being a sculptured representation of some huge beast built up of wicker work. Certain marks on its surface warrant this supposition, which is strengthened by the fact that other representations of a similar animal, which occur on the same series, have the most distinct indications of a basketwork origin. Resembling no known animal, these curious figures, which are represented above 20 times on the Scottish stones and are nowhere else to be met with, have a general likeness to each other. They are all in postures, and all distinguished by the striking peculiarity of having no feet, the limbs terminate in long ones rolled up after the manner of volutes, obviously suggesting the idea that if thrust deeply into the ground, they would serve to keep the Colossus in a standing attitude. We dare not assert that there is any positive connection between the huge animal on the Shandwick stone and the colossal images mentioned by Caesar and Strabo, as being employed by the Druids in their human sacrifices, but the coincidence is sufficiently curious and interesting to demand a passing notice. It is supposed that these and some other as yet inexplicable devices found on the same stones are symbols of a religion prior to Christianity, a circumstance by no means improbable, as it is known that convents among the Saxons and probably the Britons also, clung with much pertinacity to some of their druidical and pagan customs long after they had assumed the outward emblems of Christianity. Of all the superstitious legends of the Middle Ages, none was more widely popular than that of St. Patrick's Purgatory. The little island in gloomy Loch Derg, in which it was believed that both the pains and advantages of purgatory could be anticipated, and the duration of its torments abridged, was visited by great and powerful pilgrims, who enriched its clerical guardians by their offerings. In this place, where ancient superstitious practices still linger, the remembrance of its founder and his imputed miracles would naturally be longest retained, and any relics appertaining to him preserved with pertinacious care. None such can now be found, but it is recorded that about or before the year 1630, a certain Lord Dillon visited the island, accompanied by a government surveyor, and they gave a detailed description of the place, which was published by the then bishop of the diocese. In their report it is stated that at the east end of the church there is a heap of stones on which there is a cross made of interwoven twigs, This is known by the name of St. Patrick's altar, on which there do lie 3 pieces of a bell, which they say St. Patrick used to carry in his hand. Some of the human figures sculptured on the Scottish and Manx stones are so executed as to suggest that they also are reproductions from originals formed of twigs. This is particularly the case with a fragment at Forteviot, the ancient Celtic capital of Scotland, on which 4 men, some animals and a cross are carved with curious rudeness, and with a portion of another crucifixion from the Isle of Man. Both of these have a considerable resemblance to the rustic work of rough twigs with which many gardeners of the present day delight to ornament their summer houses and garden seats.